ESPN front office insider Bobby Marks. He joins me now to talk about that and more. NBA, it has been a wild couple of days here in the NBA, Bobby. Thanks for taking a couple minutes. I know you guys are busy with the deadline.
Oh, you're welcome. How are you?
Doing well, man. I was just in Atlanta flying home, so I got a chance to listen to you on the Woj podcast. What are you guys, sitting in the cafeteria up there? Doing that thing?
Pretty close.
I just
Pretty close to it.
I just envisioned the two of you at the cafeteria, like just throwing NBA trade secrets back and forth.
I think we were sitting in the middle of a hallway we're outside the studios at, I don't even know when we did it, midnight. Usually our best productions are after midnight, so yeah.
Well, I learned a lot.
We had fun with that.
I learned a lot in that, and I want to get some insight from you on a couple of things. Let's start with this Anthony Davis thing, which seems like it's in, it's out, they're in, they're going to make an offer, they're out, off the table. Realistically, if you're Bobby Marks is in the New Orleans front office, what are you recommending for them at this point?
I'm recommending to listen to what they're offering. I mean, unless you have a comfort level that Boston is going to make you a significantly better offer come July, and that could be the case. I'm looking at what you get. You're getting 2 first-round picks, and you're getting 2 unprotected first-round picks, and you're getting Alonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram. Some salary cap fillers here. I don't know if you're going to get much better in the offseason unless New York possibly gets the number 1 pick in the draft. Or, as I mentioned, Boston decides they want to part ways with a player like Jason Tatum here. I think the one thing that you have to be careful with the Pelicans is kind of losing your leverage. I think you've got leverage now, but when you get into the offseason, especially if Boston drops out of it somehow, then you're being offered now is probably not going to be the same package. So I understand the hesitancy to send him to the Lakers, especially for a player who demanded a trade a week ago with the intent that Los Angeles was going to be the team. But I think it is something that you need to consider. I'm not saying I would, to pull the trigger, but I think it's something that you need to consider with your basketball people.
You like the deal if you're New Orleans and you look at the deal that they've offered you reportedly, are you okay with that deal? I mean, you saying that's more than I thought I'd be getting it under the circumstances, or do you need more?
I'm okay. I mean, I don't know how you're going to be able to pry 2 more unprotected first-round picks out of them, especially that you have to take on that Solomon Hill contract. Usually, when you're taking on a undesirable contract, the package of what you're asking for kind of gets lessened here. So, yeah, I just think we're a little bit, we're in, I guess, uncharted waters because it's Anthony Davis. It's a top 3 or 4 player in the NBA that's not on an expiring contract, that has another year left. I think, compared to what Boston gave up to get Kyrie, I think you're almost going to have to double what that package is. And so I'm okay with it if there's nothing else there, but that doesn't mean I have to do anything because, as I said, Davis is under contract through 2019-20.
Yeah. Yeah. The Boston situation is interesting because, well, let me ask you this before I get to Boston. Does this rival, I guess Anthony Davis is a higher profile player, but rival the Paul George situation at all?
A little different because Paul was in the offseason, and that was June, and I think it's less of a distraction. I think that happened right before the draft. This is not in season. This is not a player who's been injured. Now, I mean, the other question will be is that, I'm sure we'll talk about is that what happens if they don't trade him, do you play him there? So I think it's a little bit easier. It's less of a distraction when you're doing off-season deals compared to right smack in the middle and you've got a clock ticking. But, yeah, it's comparable because it's a player that's asked to be traded, similar to Paul in, I guess it was 2017 to the Lakers. And a team came in Oklahoma City and was willing to take him on a 1-year rental and basically, sold him on the idea of staying. So is there a dark horse team out there right now to sneak in the next 2 days? I don't see it right now. Could change in the offseason. But, yeah, I think if you're looking at comparables, the Paul George situation certainly would stand out.
Okay, for the Sixer fans who are sitting here saying if the Celtics get Anthony Davis, we're in trouble, what are the possibilities of that happening? And it can't happen this year, correct? They would have to wait till the offseason.
Yeah, they have to wait till Kyrie opts out of his contract. It's I call it the Kyrie rule. You cannot have two players who sign these designated rookie extension contracts that you've acquired under one roof here. They acquired Kyrie, from Cleveland. Davis signed a similar pact in New Orleans. You can sign one of your own, but you can't have two under your own roof. So yeah, they're as I say, they're sitting on the sidelines until July.
So you don't have to worry about that possibility happening here. The interesting thing is the Lakers, now it's the sources saying they're waiting for a counter offer on Davis. If you're New Orleans, do you just sit and wait, or do you pick up the phone and start to get engaged in this thing? I mean, if I'm New Orleans here, I feel like I almost want to, I don't know, I say punish him, be like, you know what, I'm not taking him, and you're going to sit for the next year and a half. Like, I feel like the league cannot continue to allow these things to keep going on. Yet they love it because it keeps this kind of conversation at the top of the headline. So it's kind of a catch-22, but you can't keep having these players dictate who and where they want to play.
Well, it's funny. It's almost like, yesterday, what goes on the court becomes secondary now.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I mean, until maybe we get into March, and of course the playoffs take precedent, but, the leading up to the deadline, basketball, the trade deadline and transaction game is that's what's talked about the most. We like chaos a little bit here, and here's chaos. And yeah, I mean, if he's not moved by Thursday, I would not play him at all. I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs. They're heading towards the lottery. He wants out, and he is your best asset to go out and kind of hit the retool button here. And I don't care if he's healthy or not. I don't care if the league comes in and says you have to play him. I'm not doing it because it's not like he wants to be there, as I said, and I can't afford for him to get hurt.
Let's go back to the Porzingis trade real fast and kind of give us some insight on what Dallas is thinking there. I guess New York is saying he wasn't the guy. He didn't want to be here. And, I think New York – I actually like what New York did in the deal. I mean, finally, they kind of got picks back. I heard you talking on the podcast, about the fact that for years, they had to keep making trades to try to get guys because they had no picks. You get to that situation where you're one of those teams where you're constantly trying to sign a mid-level guy for too much money. It puts you in one of these terrible situations. I feel like they're finally beyond that horrible situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it in New York, it's basically a marriage that had dissolved. There was no going back or repairing that. He did not want to be there. He made it pretty clear to New York he was going to be a restricted free agent. The Knicks had a choice to either move him before the deadline or hold on to him and possibly sign him long term, or have the threat of him signing that 1-year qualifying offer. And they chose to move him. And you get Dennis Smith Jr., you get one unprotected, one mildly protected pick. DeAndre Jordan, Wes Matthews more just kind of to make the money work right now. And then we'll see what happens this summer. It gives you a ton of flexibility going into the summer of 2019 with a really rich class. And I get it from Dallas's perspective too, because they've really have not been a big player in free agency. I think they saw the fortunes of, Luka Doncic, who they drafted, that you pair another franchise level player next to him, takes them a little bit out of free agency, and that's kind of how they're going to build. And the cost is that you get to take Tim Hardaway and Courtney Lee on. So I understood it from all angles. I think it's kind of one of those trades that we need to A, wait and see what New York does this summer. B, let's see how Porzingis returns from that injury.
It's one of the things too that I thought you explained really well was a team like Dallas, where they go out and sign Harrison Barnes, you're signing B-plus players at A-level money, and these teams are the teams that are constantly stuck, and finally they make a trade. They find a partner where they can get an elevated level player, they hope anyway, in Porzingis.
Well, you're right. I mean, there's, I think it's great for us to talk about cap space and how much they have to spend, but in reality is that there's probably maybe a handful of players that are worth max money. Most of them that we're going to see in the All-Star game and, in a couple weeks, and some who will be on the All-NBA list. And when you have, $70 million, it really tests your patience, because if you miss out on guys, there is a pressure to go out and sign, players that can kind of keep you afloat. And I think that's kind of where teams get in trouble. It certainly is in 2016 when teams spent a lot of money on some C-level players, but gave them big-time contracts. So I think you got to be careful. I think there's a lot of ways you can use cap space, and it's just not about going out and signing players.
Bobby Marks is our guest here, ESPN Front Office Insider. By the way, go listen to the Woj podcast recently. Great stories on Darren Williams and Jason Kidd and some of the trades, during that era of the Nets. You guys really got into some background stories, behind-the-scenes stuff there that was really cool. You talk about max money and all-star players. Do you envy the situation that Elton Brand is in right now with Jimmy Butler?
I don't. I don't. I mean, that's another. Hey, you went out and made the trade in November. Now we all know he'll be a free agent this summer. Now, are you committed to paying top dollar in long-term money? At the minimum 4 years. You'd love to have Butler on another year, so you can really get a comfort level here. So, I think you're going to be at a decision here where you are comfortable paying him, $30 million a year for the foreseeable future. And if you're not, I know you gave up a bunch to get him, then you walk away. This is we see that John Wall contract right now, and John's hurt. That's probably one of the least desirable contracts in the league. And I'm not saying that about Jimmy, but if there's any hesitation, just because you gave up Robert Covington and Dario Saric, you'll walk away from it. But I think
with nothing in return, correct?
I don't think you can kind of flip Jimmy in the next 2 days here. But it's the one thing you don't want to do is to commit to a player that you have second thoughts about. Or if you're gonna do it, you go the Blake Griffin route where you're signing a player and you're flipping. I call it house flipping. You flip them down the road. But yeah, it's not a. I mean, they've got a good team. But this is who they are right now. If you commit to Butler and then Ben this summer, who's extension eligible, you got Joel. So those are your three main guys making $80 million plus.
You said you don't envy the position they're in, but if you're there, are you testing the waters, making calls? Hey, anybody out there interested in Jimmy? Or is that one of those things that just kind of falls in your lap? Somebody calls you and says, "Hey, would you guys move Butler?"
I think it's more of somebody calling you. I don't think you're out there pursuing a Jimmy Butler deal. I think the priority in Philadelphia is kind of how do you shore up your bench. You guys got spoiled last year, I think, in the buyout market with Bellinelli and Ilyasova, and I think the buyout market's going to be really enticing. I think I'm projecting at least 10 to 12 players bought out of their contract, and if Wes Matthews is not moved by Thursday, that's going to be a hot name that a lot of teams, including Philadelphia, will chase. But yeah, I think you're taking calls, but I don't know if you have to go out there and swing for another home run deal. I mean, I think if there's any encouragement, I think it's what they did, in Golden State last week when you're playing at a high level like that. Then that's kind of what the team is. But I do think you need to shore up a little bit from the bench standpoint. But I think that might come in the buyout market.
The whole Butler thing is interesting because they've been good. I mean, they've been very good with him, but it still seems like it's a little bit of a clunky fit there. Ultimately, you mentioned they need more depth. The hard part for them is, and maybe you look at their roster and see some other things here, Bobby, but do they have the ability with what they have on their current roster to keep Butler around and improve around them to the level where, look, you trade for Jimmy Butler, you're saying we're going for this, right?
Well, you're right. And then, the interesting thing is that, what happens to J.J. Redick? Who's been one of your better players, one of your most consistent players, and going into the offseason here, as far as can you retain him, or is Landry Shamet, is he kind of your Redick in waiting here? So I think it's a lot of questions. When you're paying a lot of money to 2 or 3 players, you got to hit on the draft, you got to hit on at least one minimum guys, and then be careful what you do with your whatever remaining cap space or your room mid level exception. But you need that next. I mentioned that on the podcast. You need that next layer of guys to develop and be there waiting in the wings when a Jimmy Butler can't play or a Joel Embiid can't play, because you have such a top-heavy roster.
Right, was it when Jason Kidd was done and couldn't play anymore? It was the next guy, Williams, that wasn't ready to take his spot. And when you don't have that second layer and one guy leaves, that's when your team kind of gets, left in the dust a little bit there. Now, this team, of course, has a lot of young players around them, but it almost feels like they try to accelerate it by getting Butler here. Let me ask you, as a guy who worked in a front office, you have a guy like Chandler who's out 2 to 3 weeks, but it's right at the deadline. Does that change your – man, we got to do something because this guy's hurt? I mean, or do you say, well, we'll get him back, we'll be fine?
Well, I think it's you look at Wilson, he's on an expiring. I think you can certainly put feelers out there as far as what can you bring back with him. You probably would have to attach something, maybe, 1 or 2 second-round picks there for a player that can kind of come in now, or are you content waiting until, I guess, March for him to return? Has he made that much of an impact, and how much are you going to rely on him come the playoffs here? So, yeah, I mean, I think if there's a guy to be moved just because he's on an expiring, and Philadelphia still has a boatload of, second-round picks here, it would be, it certainly would be Wilson. Bobby
Marks is with us here. Let me the whole Fultz thing. Has that changed at all? Does anybody care about him anymore? Or is he just falling off the map?
We haven't talked about him forever, right? I'm sure we've been talking for 15 minutes, and this is the first time you've asked me about him. So.
I don't know what he's seen him. I mean, well, we've seen him, but I mean, has anybody kicked the tires on him? Does anybody care about him? Is anybody intrigued by him?
I think whatever you can get from Markelle Fultz this year is a bonus. I really do. I don't know how much of an impact he can make for what you need down the stretch, and if he can help, great. And it's probably a situation that you got to have to resolve in the off season.
Oh man, it's unbelievable because they said 3 to 6 weeks. We haven't heard a word. I mean, the way I see Bobby, I'm wondering. Last year they gave him like that 10-game run at the end of the year, and I guess that was kind of like, hey, if you could give us something in these 10 games, we'll evaluate you in these 10 games. And I guess they saw, he is what he is. Is it similar this year where, hey, we'll give you the final 15 games to show us what you got?
I think so. I mean, if he's cleared to play, I don't see why he wouldn't play him the last, 10 to 15 games. Because if he doesn't play, the likelihood is that he doesn't play summer league, and then you're waiting until training camp again. So that's basically another 8 or 9 months here before we see Markelle Fultz if
Crazy.
He's there. When training camp starts, and now you're going into year 3 of his rookie contract. So yeah, I mean, I think if he is cleared. I think the goal is that you do need to put him out on the court.
Mirotic, you think he's a good fit for Philly?
I like him. I do. I really do. I mean, he's one of those guys, Julius Randle, to kind of keep your eye on in New Orleans as far as teams that are selling, and he's on an expiring contract. You can potentially retain him next year. I think a lot of it's just kind of keeping him healthy. I mean, he's been dinged up a lot. Missed a ton of games this year, but he gives you a dimension. He gives you that, gives you a stretch forward that I don't think that team has. Muscala's giving you some nice moments, but I think he gives you a guy that's been in some big games, especially last year in that Portland series.
Yeah, who would have helped this team? Bjelica.
He would have helped, and that is I don't think that's something people in Philadelphia want to talk about.
No, it's not. Talking to people up there about that whole situation, not happy. Who are some interesting names you're keeping an eye on for Thursday? Well,
I think you look at the players in Memphis with
Mike
that
whole
Conley,
story. Wow, how about that?
Marcus
Conley.
Gasol, yeah. Garrett Temple, JaMychal Green. I mean, that's pretty much a fire sale there. I think Conley potentially keep an eye on Utah with him. Gasol a little bit harder to move. Potentially teams like Detroit, Charlotte. I think it will be interesting to keep an eye on Houston if what they're willing to do as far as with their first round pick, if they can shore up some of their depth there. There are a bunch of teams that are kind of preserving room for next summer, which is Brooklyn and certainly New York. We've talked about the Clippers are. I don't know how active the Clippers will be. I think I mentioned before the buyout market will be intriguing. I mean, there's Wes Matthews, DeAndre Jordan, Robin Lopez, Enes Kanter, players like that. Zach Randolph could become available here. So it will be interesting. I think there's in the East there's so many teams that are kind of bunched up. Teams like Orlando that are out of the playoffs, but 2 or 3 games in a loss column are a little more hesitant to move a Terrence Ross at the deadline. So hopefully things start to shake out in the next 24 hours, gives us a little more clarity.
Bobby Marks, ESPN.com front office insider here. JaMychal Green's the guy I like for Philly, too. I think he'd be a nice fit if they can figure out a way to get him. Boston, Toronto tonight, Denver Friday, L.A. Sunday, Boston Tuesday. Nice stretch of games here in Philly. We'll find out a lot about this team. They beat – Bobby, this is so Sixers. They beat Golden State on the road in a week that everyone's at the Super Bowl. It's a 10:30 game, and no one's paying attention, and then they lose to Sacramento the next day. So people are like, did they really beat the Warriors? I don't even remember it.
That Sacramento team is not, and I think it's probably because we're maybe more in we're in the East Coast, and we don't see them. That team is a good team. I mean, that especially at home. When they got that crowd going there, and I think it is a little bit of if you let your guard down, they're going to outrun you in the gym here. So I don't think it's a Sacramento team from 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it's a team that's, I think, one game out of the loss column in the 8, out of the 8 spot. So yeah, I get it, but it's a great test coming up here in the next 3 or 4 games. I think the interesting is, can you catch one of these teams that has maybe made a trade and they're missing some parts, maybe possibly the Lakers here. But yeah, I mean, it'll give you kind of a good litmus test, kind of going into into the All-Star break and then eventually into March.
Thankfully, that Kings team is good. If you're a Sixer fan, thankfully,
right.
Bobby Marks.
This is not the year you wanted them to be bad.
No, it's not. Check out him on the Woj podcast, the most recent edition, talking about the trade deadline, Anthony Davis, Porzingis, and some great stories from his time with the Nets. Bobby, thanks for the time, pal.
You're welcome. Talk to you.